This is South America. It consists of 12 countries and the forests and mountains, which are creating natural barriers and shape the continental politics. This is a good example of the relation between geography and politics. The Amazon forests, as well as the Andes Mountains, are the factors that prevent the emergence of a dominant power in the region. No modern army can cross either the Andes or the Amazons. They are impassable for the modern land forces, and crossing via the air would be too expensive. This is partially the reason why the Portuguese dominated the Brazil, while the Spanish were mostly ruling the western and northern parts of the continent. An interesting case in study is Brazil, which is currently the 9th largest economy in the world and constitutes a total of 50% of the South America's population. Brazil should be dominating the continent, however, the reason it doesn't is geography. The natural barriers of the continent limit the Brazilian power. Another strong example of this is the Venezuelan crisis. Venezuela has built its economy upon the high oil prices of the early 2000s. However, when the oil prices plummeted in the second decade of the century, Venezuela fell into chaos. Usually the neighbors are deeply involved into a crisis next door. Well, because it is the next door. It has an inevitable impact on them. However, here, the Amazon forests simply prevent Brazil from being able to act in Venezuela freely. The Brazilian geography creates limitations as well as advantages for its economy. The already mentioned Amazon rainforests in the north are inhospitable to agriculture and large populations. The Cerrado region in the center of the country is a vast tropical savanna which, thanks to the technological advances, thrives in agriculture. On the other hand, the distance between the Cerrado region and the Brazilian population core and the ports create a serious challenge to the Brazilian economy in terms of transportation. This is how geography influences and shapes the politics of Brazil. Another interesting example is Argentina. Argentina has to be talked about because it is by far the second largest country on the entire continent. It is a country thriving in terms of its natural resources and geographical advantages. Argentina's economic and political core is in the Rio de la Plata river system, which provides its agriculture with an access to the clean water, as well as helps the transportation for the nation's overall produce. In addition, the river system grants Argentina with a natural influence over the region, as any produce in the De la Plata basin would eventually end up in Buenos Aires. Therefore, produce of both Paraguay and Uruguay are a subject to Argentina's control. To the south and the west of this region, Argentina's lands become much less productive and much more sparsely populated. However, they are rich in terms of oil and natural gas. The Andes Mountains create a natural border with Chile and prevent any invasions from the west. By doing so, the Andes Mountains form a natural defense to the Argentina's western border. However, there is one major disadvantage to its geography. It is that Argentina is vulnerable to the invasions from the north. Historically, Paraguay played a major role here. However, today, growing Brazil creates a military threat to the country's core, Rio de la Plata region. The next country on the list is Chile, which is a country squeezed between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes and is also rich with a precious metal, which is a vital part of its economy. First things first, Chile shares the third longest border in the world with Argentina, and usually it would mean that the two countries would either trade a lot or will compete with each other. However, the Andes Mountains make any interactions between the two very difficult. In addition, Chile is the largest copper producer in the world. Most of its copper can be found to its north. The precious metals production constitutes approximately 80% of the Chilean production. Copper alone accounts for 10% of the country's GDP. Add to that the fact that because it is placed on the Pacific edge, Chile is practically a gateway for the trade between Asia and the rest of South America. This is why it has signed more free trade agreements than any other country on the continent, most of them with the Pacific countries. Thus, Chilean geography is a great example of how geography shapes politics. Thanks to its geography, Chile gains necessary security and economic advantages to build the wealth. To the north of Chile is Peru. Peru is the third largest country in South America. Peru has three main geographic zones: the Amazonian forests, the Andean highlands, and the desert coast, which is the country's economic and political core. The country's geography contributes in both positive and negative senses to the country's economy. Before the Spanish came and started the whole colonial stuff, the civilizations in Peru were focused in the Andean mountains, where most of the Peru's natural riches are concentrated, including the precious metals and hydrocarbons. However, with the colonization, the foreign trade came to the region, and with it, the economic and social core shifted to the desert coast. This eventually led to the creation of the modern Peru. The Andes Mountains and the Amazon rainforests create a natural defense against any power to the east. As a result, Peru faces the threats from its north, the south, and the coast. This is the reason of Peru's territorial disputes with both Ecuador and Colombia. However, Peru's main threats come from the south. In the years between 1879 and 1883, Peru and Bolivia fought a war against Chile. As a result, Chile annexed parts of both countries. However, Peru is also full of ethnic minorities, which, although do not threaten the nation as a whole, still create tensions in the region. This is because these ethnic minorities are living in the Andean mountains, where the economic and infrastructure development is difficult. Economic problems create additional tensions. Not only that, but Peru is also a home to the coca plant, which brings the drug trafficking networks of South America to the Peru in pursuit of the cocaine supplies. This even further fuels the tensions and instability inside of the country. Thus, Peru's geography defines its domestic and foreign affairs. A different example of how geography shapes the South America's politics is Colombia. This is a country which borders both Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. In order to maintain maritime access to both of its shores, it either has to sustain decent ties with whoever controls the Panama Canal, or control it itself if it can. Colombia actually has been controlling the Panama Canal between the period of Gran Colombia and 1904. However, it has lost its control over the Panama Canal with the Panamanian independence. Its economic and political centers are in the city of Bogota. The Magdalena River connects its capital with the ports in the Caribbean Sea. The Amazonian rainforests to the south, as well as the Orinoco Plains, naturally prevent any power from threatening Colombia from the south. In addition to that, these regions are home to the coal and oil. The country's position on the border between the South and Central Americas makes it a primary route for the drug trafficking in the region. This in turn creates instability inside of the country. All of these factors play a major role in defining Colombia's foreign policy and its internal challenges. Venezuela is an oil-rich country with a population of 28 million. The center of the country's political and economic life is Caracas. There will be a separate video about Venezuela, however, it is also a great example of how geography shapes the nations. Venezuelan economy has been dominated by oil since the late 19th century. Its dependency on oil largely led to the current political crisis. To the south are the Guyana highlands, which separate it from the Amazon forests and thus create an additional buffer space against Brazil. Venezuela's geography secures the country's southern border, however its dependency on oil led to the current state of affairs in the country. Guyana is a country which has a geographical location which allows it to build wealth and protect its borders and may allow it to become rich in the near future. Guyana has major gold reserves, which is one of its main export commodities. However, in recent years, foreign companies discovered oil there. This may bring Guyana the wealth never seen before. The Essequibo River is the largest river in all of Guyana, stretching across the country. Rivers usually support agriculture and overall production in the country by providing cheap access to the clean water and transportation. However, Guyana's main threat comes from Venezuela, which claims that all of the land west to the Essequibo River belongs to it. Therefore, the border between the two countries is closed and the relationships are tense. Interesting thing about the Guyanese demographics is that 40% of the population is Indian. This is because Guyana was a British colony for a while, and after the abolishment of slavery, the British used Indians as the cheap labor in Guyana. That is why Guyana is one of the few countries outside of Asia which recognizes Hinduism as an official religion. Thus, the Guyanese geography shapes its foreign and domestic affairs. Bolivia is a landlocked country which borders Brazil, Chile, Peru, Argentina, and Paraguay. Its geography forces its foreign policy. Bolivia lost its access to the Pacific Ocean in the War of the Pacific in 1879. Since then, Bolivia claims the territory it lost in the war, because it is its only chance to gain access to the ocean and decrease its dependency upon its neighbors. Adding to that, the country's geography divides its population between the highlands and the lowlands. Country has two political cores, separate for the indigenous groups of the highlands and the Mestizo people in the lowlands. The cities of El Alto and Santa Cruz accordingly. This division led to the strong regionalistic tendencies in the country. The more developed lowland, where most of Bolivia's agriculture and natural gas production take place, historically demand more autonomy from the government in La Paz. Thus, the Bolivian geography influences the politics of the state. All of these countries are excellent examples of how geography has an impact on the political affairs. The Amazonian rainforests as well as the Andes shaped the cultures and political struggles, possibilities and impossibilities in these countries.